things, or just that I think kind of creative writings that I've been keeping journals since like around college. So since like I've been 18, 20 years old, I'm now so I've been about 17 years old. I'm now 37. So for the past 20 years, minus the past 2 or 3 years or so. Anyway, these 3 are from 2010, and I've been hesitant to kind of read the first one out loud. On my blog, I had posted a lot of my creative writings, but I took pretty much all of them down except for 3. The first one that I'm going to read, several times I almost posted it, and then I didn't. I'm not really sure why, the hesitation. I guess maybe because it terrifies me, terrifies the ever-living shit out of me. In the part, I'm not sure if I explain it well in the writing, but like when I imagine it in my head when I was writing it, in the part with the chain link fence, it's kind of like if you imagine like what love locks are, but it's like the complete opposite. And in Lil Wayne's video 6'7", like there's a part where like there's a dog in it, and then he like has his hand held out, and there's kind of like a lock kind of thing like on his hand, and it's like reminiscent of like what's on the chain link fence. And I was like, whoa, maybe Lil Wayne had like the same creative, like a similar creative musing sometime, or maybe not. Anyway, it's called, I titled it, I Had a Dream. I wrote it on 1/26/2010, and it's about A number 1. Side note, I did write another little creative writing about A number 2. I lost that one, but it was something about being in an airport, and A number 2 it reminded me of the Greenville, South Carolina airport. A number 2 was trying to decide between like buying a Snickers bar or like a Reese's, like Reese's cups. But I don't remember any of the rest of it. That's all I remember. I don't remember if it was like a scary one or a good one or anything. But anyway, here's A number 1. Although most girls who play soccer the majority of their lives end up with larger, muscular, and somewhat masculine thighs and calves, A number 1 was not one of them. She had legs that were a mile high and were lithe and shaped oh so delicately. Her thighs and derriere were coveted by most of her female peers, jealous of the sculpture of a lifetime of sports. She was a tomboy. Her mom had pushed her to act, model, or take ballet in her teen years. She certainly had the body and looks for any of the above, but she opted instead for ice hockey, field hockey, and soccer. She was in graduate school and college, studying Russian literature to her heart's content. And since she'd recently come into her inheritance, she didn't have a financial care in the world. She made some effort at pretending she was your typical college grad student, but that was kind of hard when her last name graced a great number of the buildings on campus thanks to overly generous donations made to the school. The alma mater of her father and grandfather, and now it was her turn to represent her family's name, reputation, and honor to the establishment. She was known by most professors on campus due largely in part to the sheer volume and brilliance of the dozens of journal contributions she'd made, but she'd made with her first one published as a freshman psychology genius in her undergrad class. But inside, she wasn't the same bubbly and well-respected girl she seemed. Sometimes she'd have sick thoughts of murder and destruction and revenge and jealousy. So far, she'd restrained herself from actually inflicting grievous harm against anyone, but there was this one little niggle about the guy she'd been dating for several years now. He was so goddamn perfect it made her want to puke. They were the golden couple on the college campus, but she knew it would only be a matter of time before her darker side, which had its own vehement hatred for the man, would lead her to unimaginable acts toward him. She'd need an accomplice and knew there was only one person in the world she trusted with her boyfriends. I wrote deserving and scratched out annihilation. Her brother. And as luck would have it, he'd recently been freed from the upscale loony bin he'd been sentenced for treatment at. His crime? Animal police nearby, following up on a tip, had stumbled across a wrought iron fence from which hung dozens of young puppies in homemade nooses, some pups long dead, others struggling to breathe as they fell victim to gravity and eventually were hanged. Inside her brother's apartment was a sterile veterinarian clinic set up, where it seemed 5 or 6 puppy cadavers were in some stage of being operated on post-mortem. He kept all of the dogs' IDs, of which there were 100, and wore them on a chain he wore every day right underneath his clothes. The animal police had fought viciously for A number one's brother to rot in prison for life, but the judge, a psychiatry buff and family acquaintance, had insisted he be placed in a psych ward for several years. On his last day at the hospital, he still didn't feel an ounce of remorse or regret or anything much at all about the experience. But only A number one truly knew that, since he hadn't yet come of age to receive his inheritance and his father would have nothing to do with him. A number one knew her brother would have to rely on her financially. He'd do anything for a buck, and he was certainly crazy enough to trade in some favors in regards to her scheme toward her boyfriend's demise. What A number one didn't know is that her brother had become very close to someone at the mental hospital, his ideal woman. He was infatuated with her. Weirdly enough, she had no idea how it would cloud his judgment in this little murderous adventure. A number one approached him straight up about her plan to kill her boyfriend. Her brother scratched his beard and was silent for a moment. Then he turned to her, smiled, and said, "If I'm getting paid, I'm in. What's his name?" She told him her beau's name, and her brother's face went ashen. "He's not from South Dakota, is he?" her brother asked. "Yeah, why?" A number one answered in an annoyed tone. "It's nothing," he answered shakily. He just made a promise to his sister, and never in his life had he broken a promise he'd made to her. He'd made her before, but this guy was an intimate acquaintance of the girl he'd fallen in love with while imprisoned in the psych ward. She talked to him about how they'd once been close but had been driven apart due to petty reasons, and she'd gushed on about how much she loved him. He didn't want to do anything to hurt his crazy/beautiful playmate from lockup, but neither did he want to fail his sister. He really needed the money, too. His mind was still reeling 45 minutes later. Blood is thicker than water. As A had quickly packed suitcases. Blood is thicker than water, he thought to himself. I had scratched out. A had quickly packed. Anyway, blood is thicker than water, he thought to himself. He decided he'd do whatever A number one asked of him. He was sure his crazy/beautiful friend would get over it. Over the loss, he'd make sure he'd never be implicated in this situation. "Hey, I know something you don't know," he taunted his sister. "What is it, motherfucker?" A number one replied. "I know who this cat is. I met this girl at the hospital, and she's real close to this guy," he told her. We can find out some pertinent info from the girl and go from there. He phoned crazy/beautiful the next day and subtly worked his target into the conversation, asking where he lived and whatnot. While they chatted away, A1 strutted up her boyfriend's front steps and rang the doorbell. She pretended like everything was normal, but was silently and strategically sizing his home up for the upcoming break-in on his death's day. They drank tequila until they were buzzed, oblivious to the situation going on with her brother. Crazy/beautiful had been debating politics with him when she suddenly felt her lungs close up and a panic attack set in. He tried to calm her down with soothing words, but she was intent on talking, not listening. "She's gonna kill him," she shrieked into his ear. "I just saw it in my mind's eye, clear as day. It's my old best friend I always used to tell you about in lockdown. Something bad is gonna happen to him. She's gonna kill him with a pen. I need to go to the airport. I need to go see him. Doesn't he live near you? Will you take me to his house to make sure everything's okay? Please?" He paused. She's gonna kill him with a pen? He wondered to himself. I wonder what kind of crazy shit A is planning to do to this motherfucker. Yes, a pen! And how do you know her? How do you know the one called A1 who's going to hurt him? She hyperventilated into the phone. He suddenly freaked out a little. Had crazy/beautiful just read his mind? His exact thoughts? Maybe they'll both have to be taken care of, he muttered under his breath, almost in a trance-like state.